So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find then many of the understandings coming from the Aramaic English translation of the word. And this translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we have the understanding of the time of the end as per events of the prophetic layers then bestowed and then unveiled upon us. So then the future brings us a very clear section of many events in terms of then heaven and also the layer in the earth, and then using obviously the starting point of the Quran, very important, because the first son Ishmael then gives us then the starting point, and then later the Israelic lineage. And then as far as our country is concerned, there are lots of problems and situations going on. And there was then the live presentation today given by the President very nicely. And there were many people asking questions, and very politely they were answered. And then there were many factors related with many circumstances. And quite often during the time of these videos, there was then a perception of a lack of the emphasis of taxes. For instance, there were areas of improvement in scholarship, for instance, and then regarding also vocational learning centers, and then also patents, for instance. Those were very important topics. However, there was a lack of emphasis regarding taxes, because a government can't function without taxes. If you are an emperor, if you are a king, or if you are a president, the title is not relevant. The relevancy comes when the citizens of the country, they pay their dues, their tribute, taxes, so then the government can function. Rather than cashing our future via then paper money, we have to stabilize it and then make sure the government receives the tribute or taxes, so then they can maintain a control over those areas of printing money. So during the conversation, there was a lack of emphasis of tax gathering and educating new technologies, educating then people of having the old-fashioned understanding of technology. What is practical? These days there is a lot of mixture of, for instance, high-end certified people, for instance, in the industry versus technicians. Those are not defined, and they must be defined. And then there were areas where he was speaking, then obviously the President was giving the remark in terms of where so many people are then having the ends meet, or then doing the work to get the basics, and he kind of included himself in the midst of it. It wasn't not very nice, because he's kind of mixing himself in areas where there is absolutely no similarity. He has so many benefits. A person would be in heaven if he would have at least a fourth of what he has. So let's try to be honest and verify a person in charge of the country versus those who are then only, get by. So then it is very important, in opinion of many, if you would do a research regarding industry, you must have a delineation of then technicians versus those with certified higher ups. And quite honestly, those, they don't mix very often. So then, in our country, there's a lot of people trying to be important, and not very many people with the basics solidly founded upon the knowledge where we had then in the past, where then the basics would get taken care of first. You can get, for instance, equipment that can monitor a PCB board, electronic board, via thermal waves. That's fine. However, why do you have these high-end equipment in the hands of technicians where then most of them are not being even trained in an analog scope? That's the problem we are facing. It's not new vocational with a high technological equipment and then very nice buildings, air conditioning. Heck with it. You have to have the basics. It can be a very nice factory. It doesn't have to be, absolutely level ground and tile. Doesn't have to be. It can be rough concrete as long as a person is trained. But then our government, unfortunately, there are a lot of people without industry background. So they have a perception of the industry from a suit and tie understanding. It doesn't work. Quite honestly, it doesn't work. You have to have a delineation of technician level and then the higher ups. Very often the best would be, in many people's opinion, you find a higher up per 10 technicians. But then a person has to have a telephone. He has to answer the telephone every time. Only make sure no stupid questions, please. So then the job gets done. Then so many people in our country, they want to be important. Everybody wants to be important. Everybody wants to have a higher up. And a lot of them don't have even the knowledge. So I used to work for a company, very influential company, doing work with the oil industry also. And they did not even know what a resistance test was in the equipment. So when there was a problem with the equipment, there they were exchanging PCB boards and trying to find the problem because they did not have the basics of trying to fix what is obvious. So then we find ourselves during our country where then the crisis is very big, and then so many people, they don't understand the basics. You can't have a person without industry background and then to lead a vocational industrious part of our country. He doesn't have the knowledge. You have to have a delineation. Technician, vocational. Has to be objective. Has to be simple. Has to be straight to the point. Has to be modular. So then the job gets done, goes to the next, and goes to the next, and goes to the next. If a person wants to be a higher up, be a technician first, and then study at night, get your certification, then be a higher up. Have this in mind. You have to have a telephone on your belt, and then have to answer every time, without excuse. If you are a lazy person, want to have only a telephone to make part of your title, then forget it. If you use a telephone, you are a higher up, you are leading a group of people, you have to answer the telephone. And you have to know your products. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to understand then the schematic, because you have to understand every part of it so you can give then the answers when you are questioned. These buildings so nice and so, polished, and it is junk. You can have a halfway standing up building, you do a bit of reform, but you put in the building people with the basics. It doesn't have to be a high technical equipment with temperature wave reading on a monitor when a person doesn't even know how to use an analog scope. If you know how to use an analog scope, you understand the circuitry, you find the problem. You don't have to have high-end equipment. But then our country is caught up in an area where people don't know the basics. So in the company they used to work for, people were over there building these huge rechargers for electric cars. There was a problem with the charging system. They were switching around PCB boards because they did not know the basics, the resistance test of the equipment. Not even this much they knew it. But then managers walking around as big shots, with their cups in their hands, walking around as stupid. They don't know the basics. They don't know how to teach. Grab these multimeter and then measure the resistance from this point to this point. It has to be this ohmic resistance. If it doesn't have this ohmic resistance, then that's the problem. But then they are switching around boards without finding out what the problem is. And they ask my coworker, do you understand what a resistance test is? Didn't have a clue. I had to take my radio schematics from the 60s to work to show them what it means, the resistance test. Amazing. Should say unique, so then gives a bit of a leverage. A person can kind of try to get out of it, but at least if a person doesn't hear is stupid, then it doesn't improve. It only gives a way out of it without improving. So then it has to have a balance. You don't have to have a high technical person with a certification then by university. If you have a decent technician with the basics of knowledge, then you place a person in charge per every 10 people. With a telephone, you have to answer the telephone and get the job done and moves to the next. We used to be this way in the past, but we have become overly complicated. Not even the tax code is ready yet, and people are thinking in these high technological learning centers paid by the government, but it's not required. You can get equipment, analog equipment, via online. Got myself a very nice analog scope for $25, working perfectly. Can fix thousands of radios with it. And there are companies wasting their money buying technological equipment. It's not required because people are not trained. In Great Britain, they are complaining because in every 20 households there is one of them not speaking English. Let's not even try to do this in our country. We might find then one house over 20 speaking English, and the rest of them don't. And then you find a work environment with half of it does not speak the language, but then they make their own pockets and they don't learn English. And then a manager not from USA doesn't understand our history, doesn't understand where we come from, doesn't understand the simplicity of our industry of the past. Then you get to work. Do you know what a resistance test is? No. Gives you a desire to say the F word in the front of the person. So then, came home, I had to get my schematics from the 60s. I wasn't even born in the 60s. But then I had to get my manuals and my schematics from the 60s and then bring into work. Because the managers did not know how to do resistance test. But they have titles, certification, in a cup in a hand, drinking, walking around, and they know nothing. Dead weight. It's what they are. And our country is replete with them. Lazy scoundrels. So then the talk yesterday was very nice. It was very informative. People, they get on the telephone, and it's very, it's a privilege speaking with the president of our country. It truly is. But then, do we understand the basics? Speaking of patents and new technological equipment, you have to teach people how to show them the importance of paying taxes. You have to use your knowledge, your expertise in encouraging the people, and at the same time you have to combine taxation in the midst of it in a very polite way. So the more they produce, the more they pay. The more they receive, the more then other people get jobs. But then there are so many tax evaders, and then we have then the printing machine working day and night, cashing our future. As we understand, and then in the future is going to come the Chinese system. It's self-regulated. You can't print out money if you don't have the numbers. You have to have a matching of numbers with what we produce. Otherwise, then the computer jams. The reason why the computer does not jam at the moment is because there is a paper money where we think there is a value related with it. But we are printing so much of it, you have to have a stack of them versus then what we produce. In the future, when the system is implemented, it can't be done anymore. So then if we don't have the numbers, people don't get paid. Because the machine jams. You can't use it anymore because it's going to be an international system. Try to understand, if we could come up with our system of our own, then it would be fine. But there is a country in the world producing for the world a system of their own. So when the people then they are linked up with their system, you can't fake up the numbers anymore. And then our industry, our people, they are not educating themselves. What is our tax code? We are speaking of so many other areas. What about tax code? I'm working for nearly 2 years with radio equipment mostly. I think I have paid tax once. So can you imagine, then they are talking of non-legals. Can you imagine how many non-legals are doing trade via computer? Do the government have a clue of it? If they come up with each transaction, the government gets a share of it. Then, legal or non-legal, at least the government is being covered. But then they're trying to use this naturalization problem and paperwork and blah 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 in-house, and then those people coming together, enjoying each other's incompetence, and the job doesn't get done, and then the revenue, they don't even care. At least, if the government works in such a way where every transaction the government gets a share of it, when the system comes, is going to be an easy adjustment. As we understand, the Chinese already are involved with the mortgages of U.S. What was a bust then in the past became a huge problem with the housing market. The Chinese already got their hands on. You know what this means? What you pay for related with your banking mortgage, it's already in the system. You have to be real stupid if you don't understand. The Chinese is already having this section of mortgages in their hands. When you combine your work, what you earn, your banking, and then your mortgage of your bank where you can pay from home via online, you don't have to go very far to understand what's going to be like in the future. Meaning your houses, a lot of them are already in the hand of the Chinese. If you like it or not. If you regard yourself an emperor, president, or a king of some sort, the system is very flexible regarding titles. So then we lost our understanding of the basics of the past. We've got to get the past then in front of us in order for us to walk straight. Has to have, for instance, if a person wants to work with the computers, teach them the very clear objectives of the trade. You're going to be a technician. You're not going to be giving orders to other people. You're going to take orders and do the work. Then for every person in charge of a team, has to have a telephone, answered every time to get the job done. In every area. Or if you want to work with the radios, or if you want to work with cars, you are then a technician. You are not then a higher up. But then everybody wants to be a higher up, and then the job doesn't get done. And then our tax code is faulty. So if the government could get this tax code then lined up and updated, and then every transaction each of us do in a computer related with funding. When there is then, for instance, an object for sale, when there is a sale in the computer, then the government should have its share taken automatic. Then self-adjusts itself, always coming in revenue. But then the government drags around. But when those people enlightened understand what's coming in the future, we are far behind. The basic understanding of taxation, not even these we can get done. But then, they want to have some sort of a control of non-legals, as if the government would be chasing them around, are you legal or not? No, you go where they earn their money. Because when they work without the paper, they don't pay taxes already. But if you get in the computer, you find them over there, doing very interesting situations over there. Because as you understand, they can use the name of somebody else to get their own trade going, But if you have those tracked, then the government gets its share, legal or non-legal. Until you get the legality part of it in line, you have to have revenue. Have the revenue first, being legal or not. Then you work on the paperwork later. Or then, cash the future. When the system comes, our company, our country as a company, this is how we should treat our country as a company. It goes ruined. So then it was very nice. It was a very nice conversation, very instructive. But as far as there's taxation, didn't have any of it. No interesting or relevant information regarding taxation. We find skirmishes of people interested in drones upon American people. That's fine. You find people concerned with patents, very important. However, taxation was included. You invent a machine, and then what about the taxation? You have to talk about taxation. The government is working, doing their best to get these people interested in having advancement in technology. They can give this. However, there is this part of the taxation then when the project then is on the line, being produced. Then you encourage via, taxation, and then in teaching them how to do it. So then we have a lot to remind ourselves from our past.